Good morning. Well, death will come. We cannot enter in judgment with it. Our question why will always go unanswered. But this does not mean that we are helpless in the face of death. We can and we do rob death of its ultimate victory by living our lives so that when death comes, it takes us from a world one corner of which is a little better because we were there. And certainly we can say that of Evelyn Perry, who certainly made our world a much better place. So in the prayer books we use at the synagogue downtown at KKBE, we find the following reading, which helps us remember our loved ones, I think. It is fearful to love what death can touch, a fearful thing to love, hope, dream, to be and to lose. A thing for fools this, a holy thing to love. For your life has lived in me, your laugh once lifted me, your word was gift to me. To remember this brings a painful joy. It's a human thing, love, a holy thing to love what death has touched. So we remember Evelyn Perry and join our hearts together to give comfort and strength to her family. Mourning is a time of many emotions and memories, both bitter and sweet. So we continue our service with a recitation of psalms and prayers, thus linking Evelyn's life with the millennial-old tradition of the people of Israel and the eternity of God. If you have we want to join me in the Psalm 23. For God is my shepherd, I shall not want. God makes me lie down in green pastures, leads me beside still waters, and restores my soul. You lead me in right paths for the sake of your name. Even when I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You have set a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. You have anointed my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of God forever. It's also in our tradition we have the woman of valor, who is praised in our tradition. And certainly I think as one way of describing Evelyn, a woman of valor. And so this is a creative reading from that passage. A mother of generations, a woman of valor, she is precious in the gifts that she has given to your family. Her children have found trust and truth in those gifts. They follow in patterns that she taught. She is robed in strength and dignity. She smiles at the future. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. We benefit and learn from her wisdom. May she always be credited for the fruit of her labor and her achievements. May she live on in glory. So in the Talmud, it says that Rav Yosef, a rabbi, he would hear his mother approaching, and he would say, I will rise for the approaching divine presence. What he was teaching is that a mother is compared with the Shekhinah, the divine presence. For like God, a mother not only had a share in creating us, but also in shaping us and standing by us when we needed her most. And certainly that's true of how Evelyn was as a mother, and so I would like to call upon her son David to share with us some words about his mother.
Hi, thank you all for being here. I don't write big speeches, but this time I actually made notes. A little unusual for me. My mom always said that she didn't want anybody to come to her funeral. She always said to visit her while she was alive. But I actually am happy that you all came and happy that everybody stopped by and we've had the fun and time to celebrate her that we have. She was right in some respects in that she wanted to see all of y'all while she could still interact, but how great has this been? How great was last night? Just hearing stories, seeing people smile and celebrate who she is. So I enjoyed the funeral, even if it wasn't on the top of her list. As a matter of fact, it was not really on her list at all. It was never on her list. My mother fought hard, and she didn't fight to prolong her life. She fought to get better. At no point did she ever think she was just doing this to survive. She was going to get up. She was going to dance. She was going back to her house in Youngs Island. This was not, she's a fighter. So, and part of her fight was not even for herself. One of the things she said a few weeks ago was that she was living for my brother and I, for the family, because we'd been through a lot already. We lost our dad 3 years ago, and she really felt like she needed to be here for us. At no point did she want to be any sort of a burden. She wanted to be the strength for my brother and I, because we've already had a lot of loss. A strength for my children who have had extra loss in the loss of a stepfather. So that's who my mother was. And she also was fighting for her mother, my mom's mom, who is still with us, 105 years old. That's the toughest thing for any parent to do, is to lose a child. It doesn't matter how old you are. Leah, who has done a remarkable job of helping me put this together and being here for my family in the last week. She knows that pain. My Aunt Diane has done a great job of trying to treat my grandmother with kid gloves, because she's 105, and it's still her baby. So everybody's done a really good job. I appreciate the help. Anyway, the hospital the last week had some really good moments with my mother. Would not necessarily have expected it to go that way because she couldn't speak. But in her knowing what time she had left, when she finally kind of came to grips with what the doctors were telling her, she started writing notes because she could. I've kept them all. There's a lot of really cool notes. Her handwriting was suffering. Kind of went downhill as we went along, but just trying to get everything out on paper that she, if you'd asked her 2 weeks ago, she wouldn't have let anybody DNR her. She said she had a lot of living to do. She wasn't kidding. She was still planning on getting better. So when it came time that she actually understood what was happening, that's one of the things she wrote on this piece of paper, is that she said, "I'm going to let it happen." And the good part of the realization is that she was accepting it, and so then we could start to talk about what was important to her. So watching your mother write on a piece of paper that she's going to die is upsetting. The cool thing about that is that we then got a lot of people to call her to be able to say things to her that, even though she couldn't talk back, what was cool about it is that she could, I know my mother well, so her expressions, the light in her eyes that she would respond with as various people called her to say something nice to her was pretty amazing. It was funny when my brother walked in, her eyes totally lit up, clearly likes him better. And she wrote again on the top of the paper, "I'm going to die." And my brother held her hand and said he knows and he loves her. And then she wrote, "It's pissing me off." So, sorry if I stole any thunder there. I didn't know if anybody was going to say that, but it was too good. But that's who my mother is. She actually was, her mind was clear as day, as her body was just not cooperating. But other people who have been amazing to her, Judy Wyndham, who is right here, those are some of the eyes I saw in that last week. Judy, when you said, "Bye, my sweet friend, I'll be back soon." She had to leave the hospital for a little while, but she kept coming back. Just, you can see love in somebody's eyes, and not Judy's. I'm talking about my mother's. Judy do too, but I mean, my mom loved you so much and appreciated all the time that you spent with her. But the different people that called along the way and had nice things to say to her, telling stories, I don't remember, Allison, Carrie, Tracy, some good moments that she really did appreciate. So y'all all need to know that. And Allison was talking to her, and one of the last thing she was able to write to Allison, which created Waterworks, and I'm not trying to do that now, was, will you speak at my service? That's one of the things she wrote to Allison. And my cousin Allison here, who's super famous, had to put off some big movie deals with Sony Pictures to help us rearrange the funeral a little bit, had to move it around, but as my dying mother's wish, Allison had to be able to be here because it's important. So I will not keep you guys any longer. I want to thank everybody who came. It really does make a big difference seeing all the faces. Allison, you willing to take over? Thank you.
Well, hey, thanks, David, and thanks, CG, so much for putting everything off a day so I could be here. It really means a lot to me to be here, and I appreciate that. And I just want to note that I'm really inspired by your care for your mom over the last several years. You cannot be better sons, and I'm just proud of you guys. I love you guys. And I have to tell you, this speech is too long, but since you put the whole thing off from me, I felt like I need to give you your money's worth, so brace yourselves. When I was a kid, I went to this all-girls summer camp called Black River with my sisters, and every year, the head of the camp, Mr. D, would give this, what was supposed to be an inspiring speech to us girls, and he would say, girls, you can be anything you want to when you grow up, whether that's a mother, a teacher, or a nurse, anything. And I definitely do not mean to knock mothers, teachers, or nurses, especially after this pandemic. God bless every one of those mothers, teachers, nurses. But there are a few other options. And my sisters and I were really lucky to have my mom and Evelyn as role models to show us exactly what anything meant. My Aunt Evie was a force of nature. She could whip up an entire Thanksgiving dinner, run off in the middle of the turkey to negotiate a six-figure deal, come back and serve the pumpkin pie without missing a beat. She loved being a mom. She was great at that. She loved running a business, and she was great at that too. And seeing her juggle those, seeing how seamlessly and effortlessly she made that look, that has been an inspiration for me. It has pushed the boundaries for me of what I could do as a mom and as a person in the law and writing novels. I saw what Evie did, and I thought, all right, well, she can do it. I guess I can do it too. She inspired me. I know she inspired Kara and Tracy, and she's left a huge impact on us. She's part of us. She's in my heart, and she always will be. I'm going to talk more about Evie, but I want to back up a little bit and talk about kind of how she came to be the person that she was. Evie was born at the worst possible time. Her parents, my grandparents, fled from Germany in 1938, 4 years before Evie was born, after Hitler had come to power, but before it was clear exactly what he was going to do to Jews like them. My grandparents were smart. They saw it coming. They got out of there. But they were sharing these cramped apartments with a bunch of other refugees in the Bronx. They didn't speak the language. They had no money. They didn't know the customs. They, like many Jews throughout history, had fled with nothing but their wits, their will to survive, and what they could carry in their minds. My grandma, Bertl, Evelyn's mother, had been a model in Germany. She was a beautiful woman whose parents owned a clothing store. She then was in America trying to get jobs as a cleaning lady, which she was rejected for. My grandfather, Evelyn's dad, had been a butcher, and eventually he got a job as a butcher, and they scraped by, and they saved everything they could, and they spent all their time trying to get their family out of Germany. They got a few out, but they lost most of their family to the Nazis. This was the world that my Aunt Evelyn was born into. She was born March 9, 1942, 3 months after Pearl Harbor, 1 month after Hitler had decided on a final solution to the Jewish problem, to these penniless refugees into a world at war. Her accomplishments are remarkable for anyone, but when you think about where she started, it's really astounding what she achieved. She grew up with my mom in a pretty little house in Queens. They didn't have much money, but my grandfather loved flowers, and that yard was always covered with these pink and purple and white azaleas, just this splash, as like Van Gogh had been in that house. and always birds. I remember the bird feeders always running, all the little birds in the backyard. Evelyn inherited her mother's beauty. If you knew her in her later years, she, you would not have known what a model, gorgeous person she was as a young woman. Hourglass figure, long dark hair, just vavoom. And she had, from what I hear, a lot of kind of smitten and hopeful young men. She was so beautiful and talented as she considered a career as an actress. She really had the presence, but she was a woman of substance, and she wanted to change the world. And so she was the first person in her family to go to college. And after that, she became one of the first people in the world to be part of this new program called the Peace Corps. 30 years before Mr. D told us campers we could do anything, my Aunt Evie was actually out there in the world doing that, walking the streets of Bogota, Colombia, men whistling, catcalling her, saying unmentionable things in Spanish and English. And she just ignored them and set up what became the institutional framework for the Peace Corps in Colombia. Evie was a force of nature. And she was, pardon my language, she was a badass at a time before women were told to embrace that part of themselves. She was a pioneer, she was a fighter, she was out there breaking glass ceilings in the US and in South America. About that time, she met another Peace Corps volunteer, a tall, handsome Tennessee boy with an easy smile and a big laugh. Buck, I think your dad was smitten with her. And she allowed him to be. Evie and Buck had 2 boys. My mom and dad had 3 girls, and here's where my sisters and I come into the story. My mom and Evie made sure that CG, Charles, David, Carrie, Tracy, and I would be close. We spent summers together trading off. The girls would go to Evie's house, hang out with the boys. Boys would come to our house, hang out with the girls. And these were the best summers. All those afternoons looking for crayfish and minnows in the creek, medical procedures on those poor earthworms, adventures in hula skirts and eyeshadow. Our mom signed us up to go to camp together, not that all-girls camp, although after the hula skirts, I think, David, you could have gotten in. But a co-ed camp where David and I rode horses, just galloped through the fields of apple trees, stealing the Granny Smiths, riding those horses through the clear turquoise waters of Torch Lake. It was amazing. In Charleston, Evie showed me the angel oak, the ladies in the market weaving their handmade baskets, the art galleries where the shopkeepers love seeing her walk in. She had a running account at Swenson's ice cream parlor, a client who was paying off their Muzak bills in banana splits. And to me, as a kid, that seemed like the best business deal that had ever been struck. Eating our way through earthquakes, I was like, my Aunt Evie's a genius. As a kid, those summers seemed like seamless, easy bliss. But everyone who's a parent in this room knows how those things actually happened. All the while in the background, it was our moms making the phone calls, choosing the camps, booking the flights, driving those long drives before iPads made it a little more humane, locking down all those countless logistical details that it takes to make any family event happen. They made sure they had this time together, and I am very grateful for it. Thank you, Mom, and thank you, Evie, for making this happen. And this might, I think, be the biggest lesson that Evelyn gave us, my mom gave us, this commitment to time together, that our kids would spend time together. And something my sisters and I have talked that is very important to us, and a mantle we hope to take up and keep going, this commitment to your kids being close. All this time, in the middle of the earthworms and the ice cream sundaes, Evie's building her business, starting in the 1980s with one Muzak franchise, and expanding till she owned most of the South, all the communications in the South. She was strong and confident, and she was non-stop. She had inherited not just her mother's beauty, but also her parents' hard work ethic and uncompromising standards. Carolina Sound Communications was a huge success, but Evie didn't just stop at her own business. She was a civic leader, too, leading a bunch of small business initiatives, a leader of a lot of different small business organizations, which in that capacity, she went all the way up to the White House, spoke to Bill Clinton, told him what was what, and you guys know Evie. Bill listened. But in the middle of all that, building this business empire, she always made time for us nieces. And Carrie and Tracy and I have had a lovely time talking about memories we have of our Aunt Evie. I remember her sewing me a Cabbage Patch doll. Do you guys remember the Cabbage Patch craze? All the ladies like fighting each other in Walmarts across the country. But somehow Evie knew to sew a Cabbage Patch doll before all that happened. Her name was Ashley Jo. She had yellow yarn hair, dimples in her cheeks, and she was very important to me. I carried that doll around a lot. I do not know how she did that in the middle of running a business. I have some nieces and nephews here. I love them with all my heart. I would do almost anything for them. I'm not going to sew them a doll. I'm sorry. I love you guys, Charlie and Graham and Addie and Joey and Emma. You are awesome. I love you guys, but I'm not sewing you a doll. Carrie remembers Evie taking her to the Spoleto Art Festival and how Evie taught her to shrimp in the Lowcountry marches. She taught Tracy how to drive her fancy sports car. What was that sports car? A Stealth, the Dodge Stealth, yeah, that sports car, how to drive the stick shift, but also I remember some rumbles where Evie insisted that Tracy's shorts were too short and she could not wear them. There was a big dispute about hemlines, and of course Evie won, and Tracy walked out of the house in what Evie had said she had to wear, but can you guess what she did? There's always a bathroom, and Tracy wore those short shorts, and she looked dangerously fabulous in them. They were worthy adversaries. Evie built a business empire so vast and profitable. She employed her husband. Her sons came to join her. CG and David, who are two of the smartest, most motivated boys, found that there was nothing more interesting or fascinating or lucrative in the world than being with their mom in their mom's business. And as a mom myself, I can't think of anything I would like better than if Jack and Henry if I could employ them. That would be amazing, because what could be better than going in every day and working with your family? I don't think I'll ever have a business that successful. But I think what she loved was seeing you guys take what she'd started and just make it stratospheric. What you guys have done with it is amazing. And she could talk for hours about what a great team you guys are, what a great businessman you are, David, selling ice to Eskimos, making the connections, knowing everybody. You're like the mayor of Charleston. That's how she would describe it. And CG, she would describe your ability to bring sound from tiny metal pieces like it's some sort of alchemy. You're like a magician with the sound. She was so proud of seeing what you guys did. That she would wax poetic about your brilliance, your business abilities, your good looks, and after all that, it didn't matter. You could have been hobos. She was crazy about you. But what she loved even more? Being a grandma. She said it was 5 times more fun, 10 times easier than being a parent, and talk about, Jessica, I probably listened for an hour about your finger painting abilities. Like it was the most fascinating subject in the world, and to your grandma, it was. Apparently you had done some finger painting on her sliding glass door in the back of her house. She thought you were Picasso. In fact, she said that, Picasso Jessica. And Reese, she just loved how your sports and your hunting, your outdoor abilities, and what a handsome and kind young man you've grown up to be. She was so very proud of you guys. All right, I'm close, you guys. I'm really close to the end. I wanted to talk about my grandma, Bertl Reis, who, as David said, she's still alive. I'm wearing this necklace, which was my grandmother. She got it in Israel because I know she wishes she could be here, and I wanted a part of her to be here too. So this is for my grandma. She told me that the day that Evelyn died was also Bertl's mother's birthday. So Evelyn died on her grandmother's birthday, which Bertl was sad about. She said like this is a bad thing. But after we spoke, I think we agreed, Grandma and I, that this was a great sign, that this is a sign that her grandmother is there waiting for her, welcoming her with open arms to that other side. And I'm quite sure that Evelyn is there, showing her what anything means on the other side, doing amazing things that no one else could have dreamed of.
I can't tell you how I came to know Evelyn without telling you how I came to know Buck. My husband and I moved to Charleston years ago, and I took a job with the school district, and one of my responsibilities was to manage the PA systems. I knew that much about that. Buck was one of the first people I met, and he took a lot of time with me, and he told me a lot of things I needed to know. He also told me a lot of things I did not need to know, and things I would never understand. But he told me two things in particular that had an impact on my life, and one of them was he told me several times, "Judy, you're the best decision Charleston County ever made." I did not know this, but that was not true. And I'm pretty sure he said that to a lot of people. But when I was trying to find my way, those words of encouragement and his kindness did so much for my confidence. The second thing he told me was, he said, "You really need to get to know Evelyn. You two are going to be great friends." And that was 100% true. One day he was showing me around what was then the new Carolina Sound office space. And I couldn't help but notice all the beautiful art pieces. And he said, "Oh, Evelyn loves all sorts of arts." And I do too. He said, "But she really has a passion for the arts, and you got to get to know her." A couple of weeks later, I heard about a high school student who was talented, and he had been selected to attend Juilliard for a summer program. And right after he was selected, his family experienced a crisis, and he wasn't able to afford to go. So I made an awkward phone call to Evelyn, and I said, "Evelyn, you don't know me yet, and I'm calling to ask you to help someone that I don't know." And I told her the story. She said, "Let me see what I can do." Hung up. A few hours later, she called me back. She had reached out to people, she had put a plan together, and he had the resources to go. And that experience embodies the person who became one of my very best friends. She made things happen, she didn't take no for an answer, and she cared about other people. Since that time, Evelyn and I spent a lot of time together. We served on a board together. We went to plays, we went to movies, and we ate in restaurants all over the Lowcountry. There were some occupational hazards of eating out with Evelyn. If we ate in a restaurant where the music wasn't adjusted properly, somebody was going to hear about that. And heaven help the restaurant who played illegally licensed music. That was going to be a problem. During all that time together, what we mostly did was we talked. We talked about our lives, and we talked about our work, and mostly about our families. When we had a problem or a challenge, we'd try to help each other find answers, and she would always end those conversations by saying, "Judy, you give great advice, and I value it so much." And then she typically ignored it. Because you laugh because you know. Because Evelyn was very wise. She did not need my advice, but she loved fixing things, and she loved figuring out things and looking at things from all different angles, and she always wanted to do the best thing. But family was always what we discussed most. CG and David, your well-being and your success was the absolute most important thing to her. She wanted the very best for you, and she expected the very best from you, and you did not disappoint her. She was always so happy when she saw specks of Buck and of herself in you, and she did. She loved being your mother, and she was so proud of both of you. Susie, she loved and she respected you, and I thought it was so fitting last week when you spent that night in the hospital with her. That was so thoughtful and personal and caring, and I know that that honored her, that you did that for her. We often talked about how you don't know how much you can love someone else's children until you become a grandparent. And as you said, Reese and Jessica, you were the sunshine in her life, as you were in Buck's. She loved telling me about the fun things you did, the traditions, the spending time together, the places you went together, the gingerbread houses. She loved those. She wanted you to have lots of opportunities to live a rich and abundant life. And her only complaint about you was that you were both growing up way too fast. I rarely had a conversation with her that she did not talk about you. And Leah, she loved you. You were her family. She appreciated so much all the things that you did for Buck and for her. And she mentioned it to me often. Last week, I was so glad she was able to spend time with Diane and her sister and her nieces talking, because I know that your words of affection to her meant a lot to her. And Evelyn, as you know, as you've already heard, loved her mother dearly. Her mom is sharp as a tack, and I know this because they talked almost every day that Evelyn was able. And if I was lucky enough to be there during one of those calls, I got to get in on the very loud conversation. And I was always blown away. One of the things that Evelyn was concerned about was what impact her death would have on her mom, because Evelyn understood very well a mother's love for her child. Evelyn lived an interesting life for sure, as you've heard. I love to hear stories about her past. As you heard, she had planned to be a Broadway actress, and I'm confident she could have done that. But she responded to a speech by John Kennedy on her college campus and decided to go into the Peace Corps, an army for peace, not war. That decision brought incredible opportunity to her life, and primarily that's where she met Buck. That tall glass of water was one of the first people she met when she landed in South America. And she went on to do a number of amazing things. Her life has been rich and prestigious in so many ways. She has served and been honored by many organizations, and to me, she was just the dearest of friends. She had a hearty laugh, a sharp wit, and a wicked sense of humor. Even last week, as you heard, some of the things she wrote on her paper were funny. She was an honest friend. My daughter got married a couple of years ago, and Evelyn wasn't able to help a lot in the planning, but I had a job that was perfect for her. I had to pick out a mother of the bride dress. So I purchased no less than 15 heavy gowns, and I drugged them to her apartment at the Benton house, and she took over this like a Kardashian. She made me try on dresses over and over, and she made notes, and she had a list of preferences, and of course she told me the ones that were absolutely nots. And after a few hours, we had a winner, and it was in fact the dress I wore to my daughter's wedding. And I realized later how she attacked that with gusto, because one of the things illness had robbed Evelyn of was her need to be needed. It seemed like quickly she went from running her business and being an executive, being on executive advisory boards, to playing Rummy Cube and bingo. And that was so incredibly difficult for her. I can't imagine how hard that was. But she did it with grace and sophistication. I mean, that was who she was. Several weeks ago, she called me and she said, "I have something I want to tell you in person." So I immediately rushed to the hospital, sensing I was about to hear terrible news. And I was. The time she had left was short. And over the next few weeks, it was hard to watch her body deteriorate with each visit. And last week, when I went to see her, she shook her head and simply wrote on her paper, "Over." The words were tough to see, and it was heartbreaking to watch her absorb them. And while it's true her life on earth is over, the imprint she left in mine will never go away. I am humbled and I'm honored to have been her friend. And I've heard it said that great people deserve to be missed, and certainly Evelyn will be missed.
As David said, during her last week, for a variety of medical reasons, Mom couldn't talk. But as I was driving down to the hospital last Wednesday after work, Susie told me to bring a pad of paper because she was able to write to communicate. I was excited about that because she hadn't been lucid during my previous 2 visits. When I got there, her eyes lit up and I took her hand and told her I was glad to see her. She picked up her pen and wrote on the pad, "I'm going to die." For a moment, I was taken aback by her directness. I took a minute to review her accomplishments with her, the amazing family she raised, the business that she grew to support our entire family and many others, the incredible people she met and helped along the way. I told her that was an extraordinary set of successes and that it was okay to go, leaving that kind of legacy. She picked up the pen again and wrote on the pad, "Pisses me off." And that was about the most Evelyn thing she could possibly have said in that moment. It cracked us up. Mom was never one to back down from a fight, and often if there was not a fight around to not back down from, she would start one. It took me some time to realize that it was really because she genuinely enjoyed spirited and dramatic discourse with a worthy adversary. She relished the challenge of persuading other people to her point of view, and she was good at it. The people she enjoyed most in life were the people who didn't necessarily agree with everything she believed, but who could make a case for why they might be right, and then later accept that they were wrong. This directness fueled her success in business. Many of you know that when my parents bought our company, my mom had no experience in running a for-profit venture. They had no way of knowing if the business was going to prosper, and so my father kept his job in Washington, D.C. as a safety net, and Mom jumped in with both feet to make a go of it, knowing that they had risked their life savings in the process. And she was terrific. When she was lacking in knowledge, she found someone who knew more and pulled everything she could from them. No ego, just heavy doses of chutzpah and a relentless drive to better herself and better her family's situation. She spent a decade learning and growing the business while also being something of a single mom because my dad was in Washington 4 to 5 days a week. And she was a great mom. One of the things that she would have loved most from our visitation yesterday and this gathering today is seeing how many of my and David's closest high school friends are here. Ours was the house where kids gathered. Mom never knew when she got home on a given day how many mouths there would be for dinner, but she loved the vibrancy of having young people around. And our friends loved that they were always welcome and always treated like the interesting young adults they were, rather than just kids. That so many of you are here 35 years later would melt her heart. Within 10 years, she had grown the company to where my dad was able to quit his DC job and work in the company with her full-time. I was able to join after college, and then David. This woman with a political science degree and a healthy dose of New York attitude had flourished in a male-dominated technical industry. But she always considered it a family business in the largest sense of the word. Her employees were always part of the family, and she pushed them to succeed, even if it sometimes meant that they left the nest for other opportunities. She was most proud when a former employee would come back to visit and share their successes and thank her for giving them the right break or the right push somewhere in their careers. The fact that so many of them mentioned just that in Facebook posts and phone calls and emails in this last week would have had her bursting with pride. She always had a service-oriented mindset. After college, she spent the first few years in the Peace Corps building educational programs in Colombia, South America. David and I are particularly proud of that assignment because that's also where she met my dad. Her fluency in Spanish and German allowed her to spend a year with the organizing committee of the 1968 Olympics in Mexico, culminating with being a personal assistant to Jesse Owens. From there, she continued to be inspired by President John F. Kennedy, and she joined VISTA, Volunteers in Service to America, as a fundraiser and a grant writer. VISTA worked to combat illiteracy and low-quality housing, healthcare, and economic opportunities in poor areas. She ran a battered women's shelter and worked to make arts more accessible in Raleigh. But while she was doing great things for so many people in those positions, she also had a family motivation at heart. As the first child of German immigrants, she had been taught to value education above almost everything else, since it was the heart of opportunity. And so nearly every penny of what she earned went to keeping David and I in private schools and availing us of whatever extracurricular interests we developed. Even if the company hadn't done well, she knew that she had already given David and I the tools to build our own future. She instilled that same respect for education in her beloved grandchildren, whether it was learning math or learning sports or learning to cook. As Carolina Sound grew, she found opportunities to promote small business through the National Federation of Independent Businesses. She was the founding president of Lowcountry Chapter of the National Association of Women Business Owners. She went to the White House representing South Carolina at the Summit on Small Business. She worked with Governor Haley on healthcare and insurance initiatives and advised BB&T Bank on how to best work with small businesses. Her list of accolades and accomplishments is long, but her true gift was in inspiring people to be their best, whether it was her family, her employees, her friends, or even total strangers. I think each of you was touched by that philosophy in some way, and so I thank you all for being here and celebrating her gift with us this morning.
So we invite anyone else with, we've had some beautiful memories and recollections, so we would invite a few more people who would like to speak.
I decided to go toward the end of this to see if I could muster up the strength, but after hearing those inspiring stories, I could not go and tell you about Evelyn in my way and what she meant to me. I'll start today by asking you, all of you, if you would raise your hand if you happen to know what a shiksa is. Raise your hand. I only learned this word after meeting the Perry family. So I'll enlighten you if you don't know what the word means. Shiksa is a Yiddish word that refers to a non-Jewish woman who is either romantically interested in a Jewish man or is a Jewish man's object of affection. I came to be the shiksa in David's life, her son David. My name is Leah Harrington, and I have been close to the Perry family for the last 7 to 10 years. That being said, I'd like to begin today by telling you a story about a 40-year-old shiksa and a 70-year-old Jewish lady. You would think the two ladies I'm describing would have nothing in common. In fact, I was pleasantly surprised to learn that we did. Evelyn and I shared a love of many things. We shared a love of being women in business, and both had a vibrant entrepreneurial spirit. We often talked about opening a boutique together when she got well. In her retirement, she would probably never have retired. We shared a love of networking and marketing and sales, both being super competitive in nature. On a side note, she was one of the only females of her generation to admire me for trying to have it all, for trying to have a family, a career, 3 children, etc. She, of course, knew herself what it took to make that happen. But it was I that admire her more for paving the way and breaking just a little bit more of the glass ceiling for women like me to be successful. We shared a love of flowers, plants, and gardening. We shared a love of event planning. We shared a love of fine dining and good food. We shared a love of travel. I often wish I could have taken her to travel more than she was able to in these last years. We shared a love of shopping, getting our nails done and our hair done, basically anything girly. We shared a love of getting dolled up and going out on the town. We shared a love of special occasions and holidays and family. We both shared a love of bringing out the fine china and not saving it for special occasions, and that every day on this earth should be celebrated with family and friends, and there's a reason to celebrate. Passover and Thanksgiving being her 2 favorite holidays to celebrate. She went all out. I was always enamored by her, and she and I were so alike in that way. We shared a love of being pack rats and hoarders. Thus, our shopping got us in a lot of trouble. I'm guessing about now, David is realizing I am more like his mother than he realized. Most of all, we shared a love for her son, David, and her grandchildren, Reese and Jessica. She was like a mother-in-law to me. Mr. Buck treated me like a daughter-in-law as well. They truly gave me the extended family relationship I never had. She was an amazing lady who I was lucky enough to call my friend, my mentor, and my confidant. So, enough about me and her. I'd like to change gears just a little. As I was having a few quiet moments this week, I found that her words and thoughts were coming at me faster than I could write them down. I was inspired and moved to speak today. When I pondered what that would look like and what I would say, I believe it would not be what I had to say that was important, but rather what she would want to say and to tell all of you here today. I had the feeling she was talking to me and telling me to share things she wished she could have said before she passed away to her loved ones. Her eyes spoke volumes, even when she had no voice near the end. She, just like Buck, did not want to leave their families behind and fought to the bitter end. Thus, what I am about to say are not words but rather from me, but rather what I believe she would say to you if she were here. To her loving and adoring 105-year-old mother, Grandma Bertl, she would want to tell you how she adored you and your 8 p.m. nightly calls. She would ask that you continue those 8 p.m. nightly calls to her sister, her granddaughter, and the extended family. She would want to tell you how much she missed you and wished she could have traveled more to see you. She would tell you to continue being the matriarch of this family and the glue that holds them together. She would also tell you to celebrate her life and not grieve too hard over her death, because her suffering is finally over. She would tell you to cling to your grandsons, David and CG, and your great-grandchildren in the days and months ahead, to draw strength from them and love that will heal your broken heart. She would tell you that she would not be able to endure losing you both back to back, or they would not be able to endure losing you both back to back. As a mother who has lost a child herself, I know all too well what the days ahead will be like for you, Grandma Bertl. No mother should ever have to bury her child, but I am living proof it is possible to overcome and endure such heartbreak by clinging to your family and friends. To her two amazing sons, CG and David, she would want to say how proud she is of you and the men you have become. She would want to tell you how your strength and resilience are truly inspiring. She would tell you that she and your dad are so proud that you'll be carrying on the torch in the family business. To her grandchildren, Reese and Jessica, she would tell you how proud she is and how she adores you both. You truly were the apple of her eyes. She would tell you she loved your visits, your smiles, and your hugs. She would tell you the time playing Rummy Cube and cooking with you was priceless. She would tell you how she treasured your sleepovers and your time spent cooking and fishing off the dock. Jessica, she would tell you how she loved to hear you sing and watch you ride horses. Among the many other talents you had, she would tell you how she loved your artwork, and she would tell you to treasure her jewelry and pass it on to your daughter one day. Reese, she would tell you that she loved to watch you play sports, any sports, and she lived vicariously through Facebook, watching you do these things. She would tell you she loved your popovers and how it was a joy for her to teach you how to make those. In closing, events like this are tattooed into our memories. Their images remain despite the years that go by. Today, there is much grief and heartbreak, but there is also much love and reason to celebrate the life of Evelyn Reis Perry. She is reunited with her husband, Buck. All in all, I hope that I was able to paint a picture of Evelyn, and the words spoken today will leave a lasting impression on her, of her time on this earth. She was truly an amazing lady who was lucky enough to call many of you in this room friends, close friends, and family. She made her mark on me and made the most of the time she was here. Lastly, to each of you joining the family today for her service, she would tell you thank you, and that each of you made a difference in her life in some way, in the life of her family, and she cherished those memories. She would also ask you to rally around her family in the days, the weeks, and the months ahead. Thank you.
Good morning. First, start off what Allison said earlier about Mrs. E, which that was my, whenever I would speak with her, I always called her Mrs. E. but you were right. She was a total badass. And, you know, just her presence in a room, you knew she was there. Very vocal, very, you know, and there's a lot of times, a lot of finger pointing going on that desk like that. And I think there's a couple times you hear the, you know, the hand hitting. So I'll start off with, I'm from Jackson, Mississippi, and I'm a Gen Zach. And for those that do not know what a Gen Zach is, we are that is a word that is coined by Mrs. E for a convention that we had, I think in San Diego. And it was all about team building. If you remember building those boats in the pool that all sunk, like, yeah. I think ours didn't last very long. But team building. I mean, she was all about, like you said, support. You know, supporting you and being a better person, a better salesman, a better manager. And, you know, there's a lot of things in conversations she and I would discuss, and every time I just walk away and be like, man, it's very useful information. But going back to Gen Zach, that's basically taking second generation and Muzak, taking those two words to make one word. And so, you know, like when David bought a car recently, I was like, dude, Gen Zach, put that on the back. Because in some way, some of us had, you know, in this business, there's someone that would have a tag that would say Muzak. Or in my case, my dad had Muzak, and I had Kazoom, Muzak spelled backwards. We named all our boats Kazoom because it was a write-off, as my dad would say. And but anyway. So I have the franchises in Mississippi and Louisiana, and the, you know, first condolences from my family, my mother and father. They loved their visits with Mrs. E. Also, you know, condolences from my wife and I, Ashley. And in fact, when Ashley and I got engaged, was it 2019, Christmas Day, our first call was to David and Leah, and they were at the home with Miss E. And so Ashley got to have a couple-minute conversation with Miss E, so if you can only imagine how that went. But both David and I and CG, we followed, and Greg too as well, we followed in the footsteps of our parents. We love this business. We grew up in this business. We live and breathe and speak this business. I promise I won't give out any business cards or anything like that. Try to sell y'all something. But my father was president of our IPMA board, which Mrs. E loved very, very much and was very, very passionate about. And all my memories of being in those board meetings, you know, were because of her, because she pushed to have us in there to learn the business. She felt like it was very important, you know, for us to be a part of that. And my father was president 1990 and 91. David, well, Miss E was president 2004, 2005, and right after that time is when she started, and my father started, and his father-in-law started pushing to have us more involved in our businesses and our board to take control, primarily because, you know, Mrs. E and Bob and my father were hard workers, and she sees that in all of us. David became president in 2017 to 2018. I would like to say that our years, we literally, not to beat our chest, but we turned that board around. And, one, the past presidents before us didn't care about trying to build up the money in our account. And David and I went on this for 2 years, just taking it to another level of how much money we were raising to put in our accounts for this, our association. And a lot of the older people that were in our group were kind of impressed by, you got 2 young guys, and then we got other generations like Greg and Nikki involved, and that was very important to our success. David was president. He asked me to be vice president. I am now president of IPMA. I was supposed to only serve a 2-year term, but because of the pandemic, thank you, they asked me to serve another year. But Mrs. E and my father back in, I'm not sure what year it was, but you were 15 and I was 12, thought it'd be a great idea to introduce David and I. And that was in Canada. We had a good time. He had a license. I didn't. He had a gas card. I didn't. So we went and rented scooters. And the first thing, when we were riding was we go to the gas station, and David takes the pump out, and it starts squirting gasoline all over the place. And then he said we had to get back to the hotel right after that because he needed to check in with Miss E. And she was literally like right there when we pulled up, but she did not see David hit the front brake and go over. But we've had a lot of fun. We've also had times where Miss E would not like what we did, staying out late, and David would be like, the next day, Mama was not happy. We got in a little too late. But I would like to say that I think I'm responsible for David and his mother for not sharing rooms anymore. Because we would stay out late and have fun. And I think the last time I was in Charlotte, we stayed out a little too late. And the next day, he's like, yeah, I think we're just going to start getting our own rooms now. Of course, I didn't know they were sharing rooms anyway. But, in the boardrooms and stuff, I'll, always remember like I said, the finger pointing, her little comments when people were, discussing certain things. If she didn't like it, she was not scared to, let you know. I mean, she would tell you. I mean, she would just say, this just pisses me off that y'all are doing this. So that's just, an example. And then of course you got Buck in the background clearing his throat. Mrs. E was an educator. She taught David and CG what they know, and that's hard work. And, just taking care of your customers. And David was a mentor of mine, and I know where he got, his skills from Mrs. E. And one of the fond memories I have was we had a meeting here about, I'm not sure the location, but David picked me up from the airport, and the first thing he said is, Mama wants to speak with you. I was like, all right. So we go to the office, and David just pointed where her office was and goes, she's in there. And so I'm walking down the hallway because she's at the very end, right? And she's, said, sit down, pull up your chair to the desk, and yes, ma'am. And she immediately, it was just like, okay, so, start talking about business, sales, talking about customer service, accounts receivable, getting that money in. And I think we visited for, about an hour, and it was just, also giving me advice on how to run a business better. And then also, AR and customer service. So there was always a teaching moment with Mrs. E. And I mean, even when David and CG had taken over, the business, I mean, she was still very involved in checking in, making sure it was being ran right and stuff like that. I'm just trying to, so everybody's got the little big pieces of paper. I'm going off of this right here. So in closing, she truly saw the potential in the younger generation. And when you're younger, when we were in our, late 20s, early 30s, I was probably in my late 20s, you were already in your 30s. She took the time to sit down and visit with us and talk to us about the business and encouraged us to be involved. Encouraged us to be involved so much is that between Mrs. E., my father, and Greg's father-in-law, they all decided, based off of Mrs. E's encouragement, to come off the board to give up their board seat so that David and I and Greg could be a part of the board. Again, it was her way of saying, I need you to step up. You've got some pretty big shoes to fill. And we did. And we've been successful at it. So it's always been a teaching moment, but she supported you. And it was okay if you did something wrong. It's okay. I mean, she's going to, give you hell for it. But she used it as a teaching moment. And that was just part of that support that she gave us. Thank you.
Hi. I don't have anything written out. I don't have any notes, but I do have some thoughts inspired by those that have spoken before here that I would like to share. By way of introduction, my name is Dennis Liu. I'm from Boston, and as David introduced me to some of his friends last night, I am Charles's friend. And then he thought about it and he said, I guess you're my friend too. So I feel honored to be included in that circle. I've been friends with Charles for more than 2 decades now, and I've known Evelyn through that time. And we were surprisingly close, despite being, 800 miles apart, thanks in no small part to Facebook. But I think there is also a connection because her family's path and my family's path were not dissimilar. Just as Allison spoke about your family's history, my mother was born in China and fled during the revolution. She came to this country with a couple of young children, and she ran a couple of businesses and focused on making sure that we went to private school and education and doing her best to inculcate values in us that I think Evelyn did with her children as well. There are other parallels too. There's the joke about how the Chinese are the lost tribe of Israel. And I had a lot of Jewish friends from college, and as I got to know their families and their culture, I learned a lot, and I adopted a lot of their mannerisms, to the point that Evelyn, at one point, she called me the Jewish son she never had. Because I know a little bit of Yiddish, and I can make jokes about Rosh Hashanah, and I would drag Charles to, get bagels and a sandwich from Schwartz's in Montreal, and I actually got him to enjoy my Jewish brisket. And so Evelyn would love all of that. And conversely, my mother, who is the same age as Evelyn, she adored Charles because he was the patient, thoughtful son that she wished she has. Because, I adore my mother, but she is the most annoying person on this planet to me. And I don't think that's probably far from the truth for Charles. But I just wanted to add that in the 20 years that I've known Evelyn, she really has treated me as family and my family as hers. She would live vicariously through the various adventures that Charles and Susie and David and I would have, often with my family. She would like and comment on almost every post. She would drop me messages from time to time talking about how proud she was of who we had become and how grateful she was to have me in her son's lives. About 8 years ago, when my own daughters were, I have to do math now, 10 and 8, we came down here for a visit. And we spent a few days with Buck and Evelyn, and the girls worshipped their Uncle Buck. I think you've heard me tell this story before, but he taught them how to go crabbing and fishing, and he took them on his boat and took them tubing. And so the girls were all aflutter, and we sat down to dinner one night, and Evelyn was hearing them gush about Buck, and she made the point. She's asking, this 10-year-old and an 8-year-old, what do you want to be when you grow up? And and they answered as little kids do, and they weren't sure. It's like, well, I just want to make sure you can grow up and you can run your own company. You can do this and you can do that. And the girls were like, what's this now? My older daughter just graduated high school, and I think the trajectory she's on would make Evelyn very proud. Not that long ago, she sent me a very nice note talking about how she loved watching my kids grow up in the same way that obviously she loved watching her grandchildren and grandnieces and nephews grow up. So I will miss her in much the same way that I think I would miss my mother. And the lesson that I've learned from her throughout all these years, I know this is trite, but it is also true. It is that spending time with your family, raising them right, and being grateful for the time you have with them is there's nothing better than that. That's it. Thank you.
I don't have any notes. I'm Walter Carr, and I knew Evelyn for 30-odd years. I met her professionally through NFIB, National Federation of Independent Businesses. She was the leadership chairman when I came on board, and then I succeeded her in that. And we got to know each other pretty well. We had a lot of good conversations. And we also served on the South Carolina Small Business Regulatory Review Committee for a number of years. And I've known a lot of people in my life. I've known thousands of people. And not all of them were highly intelligent. Not all of them were strong personalities. However, there was a unique combination with this lady. She was highly intelligent, and I believe she's the strongest personality I ever met in my life. Evelyn knew a lot of things, but what she didn't know was how to take prisoners. You knew where you stood when you were with her. And, you know, she had a political science degree, but she would have been a terrible politician because she just told it like it was. And, you know, I'm going to miss the old girl. The last time I met with her, she was at the rehabilitation facility, and I spent an hour and a half or so with her. We had a real nice conversation. And one of the things she told me, she really missed being at the business, but she came to realize that her sons could do what she had been doing. And she actually regretted that she hadn't turned over more power to y'all sooner. But she was very, very proud of y'all. So there you go. Thank you.
Hi, I just wanted to, my name is Lee Wingfield. I'm a high school friend of CG and David. I just wanted to say a brief word on behalf of all those young people that spent hours and hours at the Perry residence as teenagers. And she let us be teenagers. She let us be kids. She gave us the freedom to grow and learn. I was very fortunate to work at Carolina Sound for a couple of years. They were, it goes back to that accounts receivable. And I was working overdue billing, trying to get people to cough up the cash. And she taught me how to be, I would say, diplomatically forceful with people to get them to cough up the cash. That actually paid me a lot of dividends later in my career as I left Charleston and went off and haven't been here much over the last almost 35 years now. And so I just wanted to say on behalf of all y'all's friends from high school, your mom was great. And even those of us who hadn't seen her in a long time are going to miss her. So, thanks.
I'll be very brief, and I wasn't going to speak, but Ms. Perry, everyone knows as tough as nails. My name's Tasso. I've been friends with David and CG since I was 13, and have a similar story as far as family, immigrant parents and whatnot. And education was very important. And Ms. Perry, when I was 14, 15, was going to teach me about Seder dinner. And so I was invited to the Seder dinner at the Perry's house. And Miss Perry had cooked all day long and had prepared a very formal Seder dinner. And so we sit down. Well, David and I, as you know, David likes to laugh. So David and I sat down and we had the giggles, and we could not stop laughing about everything. And Miss Perry was making it a very formal event where she was going to teach me about this Jewish tradition. Well, I'm Greek and love food, and she had set down the first course, and we began to go through the prayer book. And I began to eat the unleavened bread, which is not bread, it's crackers. So David's watching me eat, and as I'm kind of gagging on the crackers, he just starts laughing. And as you know, Miss Perry, if she has it in her mind that things are going to go a certain way, they need to go a certain way. And it was not going that way. And so David and I just began to laugh. Well, the next Course is matzo ball soup, which if you don't have a taste for that is terrible. I mean, it tastes awful. So she sets down the soup, and David knows I'm going to gag it up. And, and he's just roaring laughing. And Mr. Perry, of course, thinks this is the best, and he's just dying laughing. Well, next is the gefilte fish. And it's just, you can't even eat that. So David and I are losing it. Mrs. Perry's very upset. Mr. Perry's having the best side of dinner of his life. And Mrs. Perry says, David, go open the door for Elijah. And so David goes and opens the sliding glass door. And no lie, out jumps their cat from the back porch and comes running through the door like Elijah. And finally, Miss Perry just said, that's it. And she just dies laughing, gives up, and we just had the best time. So Mrs. Perry, Mr. Perry, she was as tough as nails, of course, but she was nothing but kind and sweet and hospitable to me since I was a kid. So I love the Perrys.
Thank you all. Thank you all for sharing. And the bringing up of the Seder certainly reminds me that Judaism was of utmost importance to Evelyn. She was a great supporter of Israel, active member of KKBE, our synagogue downtown, until she could no longer physically attend services. She was an active participant in sisterhood, and certainly made sure that each of her sons became a bar mitzvah. I share with you a tribute. It says this little paragraph is a tribute to my late mother. It was written, but I think it applies to pretty much all of you who were influenced by her as a mentor, as you've heard, as a compassionate, wise individual. So I think this would resonate. So the tribute is, it is deep in my thoughts that you taught me right from wrong, strengthening my character. It helped me feel so strong in making decisions all through my days, spreading happiness to others in so many ways. Having dedicated your life to a cause dear to your heart, to accomplish what you did was surely an art, for which I say many thanks. And I share with you one more poem before we continue with our concluding prayer. If I could sit and talk to you for just a little while to say the things I wish I'd said, like how I loved your smile, how much I loved the sight of you, your voice, your eyes, your face, to see the joy you got from work and the devotion you showed us. You were so much a part of me, that the part that's gone away. These memories you left become more precious every day. I pray that you can hear this and God will let you see the pride, the joy, the happiness that your life gave to me. I ask us to please rise for our concluding prayer. This is a prayer in which we ask God to protect Evelyn's soul. El male rachamim shochen beromim hametzeh menucha nechona tachat kanfei shchina im kedoshim u'tchorim k'zohar harakia mazirim et nishmat Evelyn Perry shehalacha le'olama ba'al harachamim b'seter kanafaf le'olamim b'tzror ha'chaim et nishmata Adonai hu nachalata v'tanuach b'shalom al mishkava v'nomar Amen. Fully compassionate God on high, to our loved one who has entered eternity, grant her clear and certain rest with you in the lofty heights of the sacred and pure, whose brightness shines like the very glow of heaven. Source of mercy, forever enfold her in the embrace of your wings, secure her soul in eternity. For Adonai, yours may she rest in peace, and let us say, Amen. And we now will, for those who would like, certainly join us for the interment at the cemetery, and we'll take her physical body out from here. Thank you.